Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ann Cronin. I am the Growth Marketing Manager here at VisibleThread. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with today's webinar. A few people are still joining. So I just want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. So if you do have to jump out, maybe you want to revisit and listen to another area again, or you want to send on to a few colleagues, it will be made available for you on demand. For those of you who maybe don't know VisibleThread or you're new to us, we're an RFP platform. We support teams across business development, capture, proposals, contracts, and compliance. We bring the full pursuit lifecycle together from opportunity discovery right through qualification to proposal development, compliance analysis, and contract review. What makes us a bit different is our combination of AI-powered insights with deterministic analysis and full traceability. Because in high-stakes pursuits, mostly right just isn't good enough. And for more than 15 years, we've been very privileged that organizations operating in highly competitive and regulated environments have trusted us, VisibleThread, to help them work smarter, reduce risk, and focus more time on winning work. Now, before I introduce our webinar hosts, I want to mention our next upcoming webinar, where we'll be joined by APMP 40 Under 40 honorees, Marieke Bland and Hong Do, who've helped lead proposal and strategy initiatives at organizations such as IBM. They'll share how proposal professionals can use technology, AI, strategy, and strategic thinking to grow their careers, increase their impact, and win within the business. So if you're thinking about the future of proposal management or maybe your place in it, this isn't one to miss. There's a link you'll see at the bottom where you can register. You'll also, beside that, see a Q&A box. Take advantage, ask questions. We have left some time at the end to get to those. And there's also a little chat. So if you want to maybe network, drop your LinkedIn in there, do so. Now, the focus today is firmly on our guests and the expertise they're bringing to the conversation. So with that, I am delighted to introduce you to Joanna Dalgreen, of Head of Social Value and Social Return on Investment at London Borough of Waltham Forest, and Caroline Richardson, Divisional Head of Social Value at the Vistri Group, who between them bring a huge amount of experience and insight into social value. So again, thank you for joining us. And Joanna, I'll hand things over to you to get us underway.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. It's genuinely great to be here. Before we get into anything formal, I want you to just hold on to one idea that we will go through today. Every piece of work we deliver, every contract, every project, every initiative creates impact, whether we design it in that way or not. So really today is about being intentional, is about asking a really important question. If impact is happening anyway, how do we make sure it's the right impact? And this is what social value is all about. And this is what we are going to unpack today. Now, I don't want to linger too long on policy, but this context really matters. Social value hasn't just appeared. It's been building for over a decade. What has started the shift was the Social Value Act back into 2012 that have asked public bodies to think beyond the cost. Then the PPN 0620 happened, and it really raised the bar and put a real weighting behind it. Now we've got the Procurement Act, and we're at the point where social value, or if you really want to think about it differently, as a public benefit, is fully embedded. So it's not just the trend, and it's not going away. But there's the kind of a thing I always say. Policy tells you what to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it well. And that gap between the requirements and reality is where most of the challenge sits, but also where the biggest opportunities are. So the why, and why social value matters in tender. So let's zoom out a bit, because if we only think about social value as a requirement, we're really missing the point. And at its core, This is about shifting mindset from what we are delivering to what difference it's actually going to make. And when you start asking that second question, everything really changes. A construction project becomes a pathway into jobs, and often pathway into jobs for vulnerable and underrepresented community. A service contract becomes a way to reach people who are often excluded. It starts to connect what we do commercially with what communities really, truly need. And yes, let's not ignore the reality. It does win bids. But the organizations that really stand out are the ones where social value isn't just written into the bid. It's felt in how they work, how they partner, and how they show up locally. And that's where it becomes really and truly powerful. So when you talk about social value, I find it quite helpful to simplify it as much as possible, because it can get quite jargon heavy. So for me, it comes down to one question: what changes for someone because you are there? Not what you deliver, not what you planned, what actually changed. Did someone get a job? Did a local business grow because of your intervention? Did a community feel more connected or supported? And the shift here, which is really, really important, is from activity to outcome. Running a workshop is activity. Someone progressing into employment, that's an outcome. Someone retaining into employment, it's an impact, is that long-lasting change. The best social value is always thought through, is very locally relevant, embedded into real delivery, and is based on real needs. Not something separate, not something extra, just part of how things get done. So if you wanted to have a magic formula of successful social value delivery, think of the kind of 5 important aspects: locally relevant, clear and defined, based on needs, create real measurable impact, and is tracked and reported. Okay, so let's talk about something quite important, and I hope something that's going to help you to construct and structure your bids in a little better way. The common pitfalls and why most social value bids lose marks. And this is from evaluator perspective that have scored and assessed hundreds of tenders in the past 7 years. Now, I know this is a slide where people usually start nodding, because most of these are familiar. The biggest issue I see again and again is very vague statements, things like, we are committed to supporting local communities. That's great, but how, when, for who, and what that commitment, that delivery will change? If we can't answer those questions, it's very hard for someone to score it. Please do remember one thing: evaluator can only score what they see. So unless you put it in there, in the front of them, it will not get score, right? Your track record, how great you deliver on a previous contract, you're maybe one of the kind of leading providers out there. If it's not written, and if it's not in the front of the evaluator, it will not be scored. Buyers aren't looking for the biggest numbers, because this is another issue, is the overpromising. And that's what really often loses the credibility. What we are looking for is the confidence that you can actually deliver what you promise. So often the strongest bids are not the most ambitious, they are the most believable. Now, this is also something that has come through many, many times, and it's been a point of many discussions I have been involved with. And I kind of always like to pause here, because this is where the conversation often shifts. there is a really common perception that social value favors big organization. And, you know, if you are an SME and you try to compete with a large, massive corporation, and the buyer is using a tool or a platform such as Tom's or Hacked with monetized value, let's face it, you are not in a very favorable position. But what you need to remember is a very important thing. Social value in those kind of platforms comes into parts. The quantitative part, which is the matrix, the interventions, what you're going to deliver, and the qualitative part, which is how you're going to deliver. And those two parts are both being scored. In a lot of, public sector local authorities, public sector organizations, NHS, the shift is not always 50-50. Sometimes the more emphasis is put on the qualitative part than the quantitative part. And this is where you can really flourish. Also, as an SME, you've got a massive advantage because social value is fundamentally about understanding a place, and SMEs tend to have local relationship, local insights, direct delivery experience, and they're very, very deeply rooted into local communities. So they do understand their issues, their priorities, and the challenges. So instead of trying to compete on volume, what works is really being focused, really, really clear, relevant, small commitments that genuinely respond to local need will almost always outperform something bigger but more generic. So this is less about scale and much more about connection and credibility. Now, let's switch the gear here. You've heard about the kind of buyer's perspective and how we perceived social value and what's important for us. But let's now hear from a supplier when the expectation shifts towards end delivery and what's important at that stage. Thank you. So,
Thanks,
Caroline, delivering social value practice, over to you.
Thank you. So I would say that for many of you, you might actually be considering social value for the first time. And it's a little bit of a frightening experience. It's a frightening environment to sort of work yourself out and into. But I'm just going to start by saying the best way to consider social value is really just ignore the words and really think to yourselves, what can we do to help or give back to our local community? And that doesn't mean, promising these multi-million-pound schemes, but actually looking at yourself as a business and thinking, what skills do we have that we could actually offer out into a local community? What could that look like? So Vistri is a very large developer, but actually as a business, we're filled full of finance teams, of HR teams, of individuals who are very good at writing business plans, at creating financial plans, and very simple social value for us to do, very quick, very easy, is to think, well, can we actually offer those skills out into local communities? How could we support local communities just by pulling on that expertise that we've actually got within us as a business? So I would say, try and stay within your sweet spot. Recognize what it is that you can actually do as a business, what your added value is, and don't try to commit to too much. Don't overpromise and then underdeliver. Be realistic with what you could actually propose. And I think a lot of people, they want to win the bid, and what they end up doing is committing to changing the whole world. And then when the reality hits of them having to deliver it, it's sudden panic stations because they may not have the skill set within the business to actually deliver it. They may not have thought through the financial implications of doing it or the reality of how they go about implementing it. So I would say the key thing is be realistic and stick to what your strengths are within your actual business as part of that. The next thing that I would really ask you to start to consider and think about is actually how you can track the impact that you're having as a business. So you're starting out, you're beginning to let your staff do volunteering days, they're going off, they're having, sessions with local community groups, and that's great because from a very basic level, you could say, our staff delivered 24 volunteering days last year. And that's lovely. That's a really nice, sweet story for people to be able to hear. But as Joanna sort of mentioned, you're really missing a trick because you're not able to truly evidence the impact that your business is having. You're not able to have that narrative of, we sent our financial team to a local charity that was struggling to do its bookkeeping, and actually the financial team went in, they're able to identify some VAT savings, and they've saved the business, £24,000 a year in VAT, or something along those lines, where people can actually see the impact that you're having rather than just the numbers of who's actually involved and what's going on. And my final point on this slide is really that social value is something you don't need to have a team of individuals delivering. You can actually embed it well within your organisation. And as long as you're creating opportunity for social value to grow within your organisation, you're going to have enough individuals within there with passion and drive for their local areas and their local communities, doing very simple social value that has massive amounts of impact. So I'm going to go on to my next slide. The next thing I'd say is that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. You don't always have to create the new, innovative, exciting social value project. And sometimes by doing that, it's actually going to be more detrimental to your bid, because by trying to do that, what you're doing is neglecting perhaps local communities or initiatives that could really benefit from your help, from your expertise. And actually, the organisations that you're bidding for this work, they know those local communities, they understand what help and support they need. And so you coming in and parachuting in with this project that you think is wonderful, they can actually very quickly identify is not really what that local area wants. And what you've neglected to do is really understand the local community that you're trying to engage with and provide services to. So really take your time, understand the local community that you're trying to work with, and then look at who you could actually work alongside with, what expertise you've got internally that can actually benefit those local communities. And I would also say you don't always have to do social value by yourself. And again, being a developer, there's a great big sort of conscious sort of need to not, have too much interaction with other sort of developers because of sharing of information and the contractual sort of implications that it could have. But social value is one of those unique opportunities where you can actually partner with other organisations and businesses, and you can actually increase the volume of impact that you can have in a particular area. So think about that and think about who you could bring in, because essentially it's really important that you're not creating duplication. You're delivering extra and further, not duplicating other projects and initiatives that are out there. Okay, next slide. So what I would say is people, again, I've already mentioned this, think that social value is a very nice, soft project, that it's the fun thing to do, and they don't actually always think about the consequences of not delivering the social value. What I would say to you is that for us as a business, if we don't deliver social value in London, the financial consequences are huge, not a little, huge. We're talking well over 6 figures, well over 7 figures in all fairness. So people really need to understand when they're bidding for work what the implications are of non-delivery to you as an organisation. You also need to think about your reputational damage. Invariably, a lot of the time when you're placing a bid, the organisation that you're bidding to, you're going to continue to bid to over multiple years. And what you want to be able to do is, go back with a reputation that's strong so that you're already being viewed in a favourable light. You've got a track record of delivery, and that organisation feels comfortable and confident that what you're writing in your bid will actually be delivered. So non-delivery of social value can actually be incredibly harmful to your reputation as part of it. I would also say that from my own social value perspective, that actually there are so many things that we could do as organisations to support local communities, don't cost a lot of money, but have real meaningful impact. And we just don't do them. We miss those opportunities, and those communities really end up missing out. And I think that's a massive shame. But if I just link that back to staff and staff retention and turnover, you'll often find that organisations that have staff who have volunteering days, who are able to feel like they're making a difference in the work that they're doing, have better staff retention rates. And social value can actually help you as an organisation to have those stronger staff retention rates. We've already sort of touched on data and reporting and making sure that you're doing that. But another key thing that I just highlight at this point is if you're not recording the work that you're doing, it can lead to underreporting. And actually, if you're not able to evidence all of the impact that you're having, you can't tell your story as strongly as somebody else who is reporting effectively. So, just think about that. And finally, we've talked about the reputational damage, but as a sort of impact of that, obviously, you're going to end up with relationship breakdowns, potentially between you and organisations that you're bidding to. So next slide, please. And so on this slide, just wanted to highlight a couple of case studies and just sort of talk to you about the fact that although when we sort of started our relationship with Waltham Forest Council, we'd signed up to deliver a certain amount of social value, and it was quite prescriptive of the things that we were sort of looking to deliver. These three case studies are all things that have come outside of that contractual sort of obligation as part of it. And I think that's due to the fact that the nature of our relationship with Waltham Forest has actually really grown over time, because we've really enjoyed the work that we've done alongside Waltham Forest Social Value Team. We've been able to see the impact that work has actually been having, the benefit that it's had to those local communities, and it's made us want to go over and above in terms of that delivery. So the first case study that I'd like to talk to you about is our door-to-store initiative. It's not actually our initiative, it's something that we've funded, but it's a local community organisation that operates in Waltham Forest, and essentially it's a community bus that picks vulnerable and disabled individuals up and takes them off to do their weekly shopping. And you might think to yourself, well, that's a very nice thing to do, but because we're able to record the data, because we're able to understand the impact, what I can tell you is that actually it's not really just about getting people on a bus to go and do their weekly shop. It's about being able to take individuals who are isolated, who are suffering from loneliness, who probably have poor mental health, and it's being able to give them dignity and independence by helping to fund this service and ensure that it continues. It's about enabling people to build further community cohesion in the area that they're living, to get to know other people. And it's also giving them access to fresh, healthy food. So the benefits of being involved and being part of that project are absolutely massive. But when you think about it on the surface, it looks like you're paying for a taxi service. So you need to really understand what that community and that service is actually delivering. The next thing is the South Chingford Library refurbishment that we're currently involved with at the moment. So it was an old laundrette, but we were approached by Waltham Forest Council saying, actually, we've got this amazing sort of idea of turning this into a community library whereby local people are going to be able to access library services on their doorstep, but they're also going to have access to IT, they're going to have job clubs, they'll have mother and baby groups operating out of there, and it's going to create a lot of community cohesion. Is this something that you could get involved with? And yes, it was a no-brainer for us, because actually we've got a whole host of subcontractors who work with us. I think what I'd just like to point out at this point actually is because we're so committed to social value, because it's so embedded within us as an organisation, because we're clear about what it is we want to do and achieve, that's all then sort of broken down into our subcontractors' commitments. And as soon as we get projects or initiatives like this, they are more than willing to actually come on board and support us in that delivery. The final thing I just want to touch on is the Young Black Male programme that we're supporting in Waltham Forest. That's being spearheaded by Barclays, and essentially it's looking at a priority group of individuals identified by Waltham Forest, which is young black men, and looking at what their barriers to employment might be, but not just sort of day-to-day jobs, but the more aspirational jobs and opportunities. For example, Waltham Forest is very close to Canary Wharf, but a lot of young people won't necessarily see that as a career opportunity for them. So it's doing this really innovative project, co-designing with young people what they might need in order to be able to access those more aspirational sort of jobs and opportunities. And we're really excited to actually be part of that project and see what the outcomes might be as we move through it. So I think that is me done, and I will hand back to Joanna.
That was fabulous. I've actually seen a few questions coming through, and I think this is where the fun part starts, really, with the questions coming in. And this is something I've heard quite a bit. This question is, you know, how does social value, how is it relevant to certain industries? The one here is to law firms. If a law firm is bidding for any project or legal piece of work, how can it contribute to social value in the bidding response? Have you any thoughts on this piece?
Thanks, Anne. I can probably take that. I think this social value is really relevant to law firms, and it's not just as nice to have, but as a kind of a strategic commercial priority. So, you know, as we kind of touched on today, public sector buyers and then many corporates as well now assess social value as a part of tender scoring, especially in the UK. So law firms bidding for the local authority panels or, you know, government legal frameworks or a large corporate clients must demonstrate a clear social impact commitments. And, you know, what kind of intervention you might think of is if you are a law firm, maybe delivering community legal education, providing pro bono support to underrepresented, underserved groups, maybe creating local employment or apprenticeships. So social value can really directly affect whether a firm wins work or not. And, you know, there is that kind of misconception out there that social value is relevant just to some markets, just to some industry. And it's not, because anyone in any market, in any sector and any industry can really deliver meaningful public benefit. So I hope that helps.
Fantastic. And Joanna, do you feel that people are taking advantage of these type of early engagement discussions that are there? Do you think that there are, you know, maybe questions people should be asking? Is there something you wish you were asked more, maybe in these kind of early engagement stages?
I wish that we, you know, we have more attendance during the soft market engagement. So, you know, during every tender every, you know, tender that is being published, part of that tender is soft market engagement, and that's, you know, prior of the tender being published. So we don't often see the kind of attendance we would like to see, and this is an amazing opportunity for organizations that are interested in bidding locally, that are interested in working with the specific local authority or local trust or, you know, public sector organization. Come and ask questions, because that's where a lot of the really meaningful and helpful conversation happen. We also deliver in Waltham Forest bidder engagement workshops that are 100% focus on social value. That also happens during the standard stage. And again, I would like to see more organization attending this, because those that have managed to produce a really kind of relevant and high scoring proposals.
And speaking of, I suppose, the proposal piece, one piece that I do hear about quite a bit is sometimes that there can be word count constraints, which then can, make it quite difficult sometimes to answer that, you're not getting as much credibility or evidence in there. Have you kind of seen a really strong framework that has worked in responses of how to craft a strong response that scores well, or that allows people to get the narrative plus the evidence and credibility in there together? Not to put you on the spot, Joanna, but...
That's okay. I think what I will say, and then let's kind of flip a little bit of your question, Anne. We know that we are living in the era of AI, right? We do not use AI in Waltham Forest to score proposal, to score bids, because AI can be wrong, and we also focus on credibility and quality over anything else. So, not every AI platform will deliver a very accurate result. But what I will say, and this is a bit of advice, if you are using AI to write a response to a question or to respond to a social value framework, please read through that response, because you will be surprised of, how often that AI will generate something that absolutely, it's completely wrong, it's not relevant, and it will be it will be noticed, and you will lose scores based on this. So, we all up for a great AI platforms, and they do help to produce a good narrative, especially when, in a situation where there is a very rigid word count. But, human eye is a human eye. And, I think that it's really important to kind of check the response before you hit that press button, submit, whether it actually makes sense.
Fantastic. And that is very fair. I think with AI, it can be a fabulous tool to help you maybe rephrase things and to help you craft it, but you can't rely on it to actually come up with the answer itself. You lean on it to iterate on maybe the response that you're giving. And just looking through some questions here. And Caroline, for you, what does, I suppose, the handover from a bid team to delivery look like? How do you stop, or how do you keep track of commitments and make sure they're not getting lost? Have you seen a process working well there, or how is that managed within Vistri Group, or how have you seen that managed in other organizations?
I think the key for us is our social value team is involved at bid stage. So any social value submission that goes out has actually been written in partnership with the social value team. So we're aware of what it is we're sort of signing ourselves up for and the commitments at the very beginning. And then we work really closely with all of the different teams throughout the process of that becoming a reality for delivery. We work really closely with our development team around the negotiation side once we've won a bid, so then sort of turning that into a reality. And I think it's that close working with those other teams, the embedding of the social value team within those different teams at different stages and processes means that we're always really aware of what it is we're signing up to. And then we have our own tracking system. So it's not fancy. I wish it was, that'd be amazing. But it's basically a very detailed spreadsheet that sort of works upon the different projects and initiatives and sets it all out. However, it depends upon the organisation that you're working with as well, because actually some organisations will want you to utilise their platforms for monitoring and tracking their projects and the initiatives. So, for example, with Waltham Forest, we utilise the social value portal, And that's actually a really great tool because all of your commitments are on there. You can actually, upload your evidence, your delivery against it, and you can sort of sense check where your sort of progress is. Are you falling behind? Do you need to do more? What your priority areas are? And I think that also enables you to have really good, strong conversations with your partner organisation around your delivery and being able to sort of, I think, Joanna, it's led to us having conversations, hasn't it? Some of the things we'd sort of, the delivery probably wasn't as strong as we would have liked it to have been, but because, by the time you're bidding for a project and it goes into the reality of delivery, time has passed and need changes and priorities change. So actually being able to do that leads to good conversations around, well, can we do different social value delivery and what would it look like and what are those opportunities? So, yeah.
I think, Joanna, you mentioned before, I suppose it's even having that kind of attitude of we will work with you can go a long way when it comes to the response and the way that it is crafted. This is an interesting one. It's for both of you. So it'd be interesting to hear how you both kind of interpret this. But how do I interpret the weighting? If social value is 10%, how does that change how much detail and ambition I bring versus if it's weighed 20 to 30% of the score? How do you balance that? Maybe Caroline, I'll ask you first. How do you balance that when you're looking at all the different projects that you wish or plan to win, and then how to deliver them, and then balancing it with what it will take to need or to win the bid or the business?
I would say that although social value at the moment might be looking at 10% of bids, it's a growing item. And, I think there's talk that actually potentially it could end up being 30% of bids as well. So the argument that I always have is that although at the moment it might be seen as a 10% sort of item line in terms of bids, in actual fact, because of the fact that it's growing in importance, we actually need it to be one of the strongest parts within the bid framework and document. And it's often the things in social value that win us the bids because it's a differentiator. Because actually, when you look at the cost can be quite similar between different organisations, but it's the evidence of being able to show that you understand that local area that you're about to operate in. It's the added value that you're able to bring. And it is that, I suppose it almost sets the tone for the relationship at the very beginning of a bid. So even though it might be 10%, I'd say it's actually still one of the most important sectors, and it's very, very important that it's considered properly.
Joanna, have you thoughts to add there?
Yes, I think, maybe let's just start with what weighting actually means, because it is important to understand that the weighting, social value weighting, determines how much influence social value has on the overall evaluation score compared to price and quality. So if you think of a tender that has price 40%, quality 50%, and social value 10%, right? So the social value contributes 10% of the total score suppliers can achieve, or 20% or 30% if the tender is set up differently. But social value is always not a price, and the percentage determine how, kind of influence on who wins. So obviously 30% is really huge, and some local authorities, some public sector buyers like Greater Manchester, for instance, have 30%. They very, very mature buyer. They had social value implemented even before the act, the Social Value Act in 2012 has come to life. So what I will say, whether it's 10, 20, 30%, it matters, and it's really important because in Waltham Forest, our standard social value weighting, a minimum social value weighting is 10%. And I have seen it many times that the social value, when the social value became the deciding factor, who wins and who doesn't, in terms of being, awarded the contract. So it is really important. So don't think that if you only see 10%, it's like, okay, it doesn't matter, because that 10% may be the deciding factor whether you're going to be awarded that contract or you won't. See, it's simple as that.
And what's one of the most common overpromises you see? So, when it comes to credibility during the evaluation, is there, I suppose, common kind of themes or trends you see when it comes to overpromising, Joanna?
I think there's kind of two parts into this. First of all, we do use national terms in Waltham Forest, and I think as a procurement tool, they are absolutely amazing. And we have our bespoke framework with localized proxy value, with localized monetized value in Waltham Forest, which means that the value of somebody being employed as a result of the contract, somebody who's been unemployed for a long time, will be different to Camden or Westminster or maybe a Suffolk, right? But what we see quite often, bidders jumps on the matrix that attracts the biggest proxy, monetized value, without actually thinking, will I be able to deliver these outcomes? Is it actually feasible for my for my organization to create 120 jobs within 12 months contract? Well, I can tell you it's not. And so this is the common mistake and a common kind of a trend that I see over and over again. And we often discount these measures to zero because we do have that authority. So it's a bit of advice, if you are going to put a commitment against employment related measures, make sure you are able to deliver, because you will be you will be expected and you will be managed on your performance, one. And two, if you're going to put a number that is completely impossible and unrealistic, we are going to challenge you on this. And, it's absolutely unnecessary. The other thing that I have seen over and over again, especially in the past few years, is over-promising and putting this absolutely exaggerated number on the environmental measures, especially calculating scope 1, 2, and 3. And, if you are bidding for a contract that is worth, say, £20 million over 4 years, and you are going to promise a social value worth of £35 million, that is not going to happen. So again, there are, if the contracting authority doesn't have a social value team, then I want to reassure you, it's got a procurement team, and there will be somebody who's going to be scoring those bids. And if you're going to put this really exaggerated values, the kind of matrix that even for someone who doesn't know anything and have never scored the bids, but it looks like, oh my god, this is never gonna happen, because the value of your submission cannot be higher than the value of the contract. And this is another common mistake that I have seen. The good submission lingers between 10 and 20% of the value of the contract. And, all kind of answers, all kind of submissions part are being scrutinized and are being really carefully assessed. So, my advice is be realistic, and especially be realistic about your own company, because law firm will have a slightly different strategy and approach to social value than the construction organization. And this is fine, because, the buyer would never expect a law firm to come and deliver a refurb, a project for a library, or a fund something that is very, very relevant for their industry. So I think being realistic is kind of really key, really important here.
And to the both of you, actually, so speaking about being realistic, how specific should numbers be? So is it better to say, 20 apprentices rather than saying maybe a meaningful apprenticeship program? At what point does, being specific become a delivery risk? And also maybe potentially impact the credibility or how valuable the program would look? I'll throw that to both of you, actually, because it'd be interesting to see your perspectives.
I'll pick this and then I let Caroline answer. Because we are using terms, you have to be specific, right?
Okay.
So my advice is, if the buyer is using a platform that has monetized social value commitments, and you do have to commit to specific numbers, then do put the real numbers in. If the buyer is using questions only, where your qualitative part is really, really key, still commit to real numbers. Why? Because it's really hard to score meaningful number of apprentices than 20 or 15 or 10. Another a bit of advice, for me, a bidder that commits to creation of 5 high degree apprenticeships will win over someone who's going to promise me level 2 50 apprenticeships in business and admin. So, again, it's the quality, and quality, doesn't equal quantity here. Caroline?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think also as well, from a business perspective, it kind of touches on that reputational risk that we said earlier, which is, if you're going to be ambiguous in what you put into a bid at the very beginning, it can lead to misconstrued sort of relationships moving forward, because what your belief is, what you've written into a bid, can be very different as to somebody else's interpretation of it. And you're already starting off on a negative foot. I think it's key that as a business, you're clear about what it is you're going to deliver, to actually look at how you can manage that relationship. You're realistic about things, but also it's very important that you have those figures at the beginning, because you're going to have to build a business case for the delivery of this as you move forward. And actually, if you don't know how many people you're going to have or what the cost of that's going to be, you're going to be fighting your business to do the delivery. And invariably, they'll push back and go, oh, but it's not important. So do we have to have those apprentices? We haven't got the money to be able to pay for it. We didn't build it into the budget. And it's just crazy. So yeah, I would always say you need to have those figures at the very beginning.
And if someone is new to a sector or an area, how would they handle the credibility gap there? Maybe if they don't have some of the past performance to back it up. What's your advice on some of that piece?
I mean, I would always go and have conversations with, local organisations, with, I definitely go and, for example, when it comes to things like apprenticeships, I go and have conversations with local colleges. I'd go and speak to people who have that knowledge. And I think, you're going to be realistic in the bid and how you're phrasing things and what you're putting into it. But there are people out there who are willing to help you and to sort of give you that baseline in terms of things. And I would always say, don't overpromise. Don't go and put the big figures in. Be realistic. You can put in your bid document, you say, this will be our first ever apprenticeship program. We are striving to achieve 5 apprentices over the lifetime of this project, because you're being honest and you're actually putting it out on the table, but you've also not said we're going to have 350,
I suppose it's back to what Joanna said. It's back to the quality, not necessarily the quantity here as well. What's going to have the biggest impact? And I think that's back to the smaller, maybe medium-sized organizations that maybe don't have the budgets or the resources. It's not always about the biggest I suppose, loudest kind of project you can do. It's about what's going to have the biggest impact. And we might do one last question here. There was one I saw here about, oh yes, Joanna, this is for you. What are the phrases or cliches that you are sick of seeing in some of your responses? Like, if you could stop people from writing something or stop using certain terms, is there anything there that comes to mind?
I think there isn't kind of, specific words, if you like, but there is a something that I have noticed maybe in the past couple of years, and it's in a lot of the submissions or proposals, word impact is being used, and it's not being used often in a kind of right format. So there's a clear kind of distinction between value and impact, right? And then those two words are being used interchangeably, but not always correctly, because, if you think, what value represent and what impact is, they kind of, two different, they represent two different stages of the project life cycle, if you like. So, if you think of the value as a commitment, what you're going is your promise, is what you're going to deliver, right? The impact is result of that delivery, is the change that happens. So if you are using those two words in your proposal, just make sure you understand what they are and what they means. And the other thing that, we're seeing over and over again is commitments without kind of clear delivery or implementation plan. So if you are going to promise that you're during the lifetime of the contract you work with underrepresented local communities, say for instance young people not in education, training or employment, and you're going to support them through the employment pathways, please tell me how you're going to do it, who you're going to partner with, how many people you're going to work with, and ultimately what will be the outcome at the end. So as a result of your intervention, how the life of these people will change, because that's what matters, and that's what the social value is all about.
Well, I think on that note, that is perfect kind of way to finish out the session. Joanna, Caroline, thank you so much. There's so much there. And thank you to everyone who has joined and asked questions. We will, as I said, be sharing the recording. And both Joanna and Caroline are on LinkedIn. They are open to be connected with if you want to ask any questions or carry on the conversations. So with that, Joanna, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.